Welcome back, Health Impact audience. We're making our way towards the end of a successful first full day of Health Impact. And we're here going to talk about resiliency of infrastructure. So we've talked a lot about resiliency in general, especially resiliency of staff and resiliency of the community. But really, without appropriate infrastructure to support all the other things that we need to do, we can't actually get most of our work done. So we've got a great panel here to talk about that. Our friends at ClearDATA, being represented by Chris, who's the co-founder and CEO there, is bringing us this session. So I'll have him introduce himself first, and then we'll jump to Darren and Divyes, who are from our provider audience. So Darren, CIO at a health system, Divyes working on innovation at a payer. So we're going to get a lot of good interactive conversation around what infrastructure things worked in this time of COVID and we can take forward, and what we're still learning from and take it from there. So Chris, give us a quick intro to yourself, and then we'll jump to Darren and Divyes.
Thank you. Actually, my title is Chief Privacy and Security Officer.
Privacy Security Officer. Sorry.
Yes, demotion of be the CEO. He's got a tough job. Mine's a lot more fun, and I'm a lot more passionate about that. My job is really simple in concept. It's how do we take these workloads that are put into the cloud, and how do we do those make sure that those are put in the cloud in a way that allows companies to innovate and to do so without breaching any kinds of laws around HIPAA, GDPR, CCPA, whatever the regulation is. We have to help them comply with that. And we have to help them do that in a way that consumes cloud services, which are being innovated thousands per year across the three major clouds. So I'm happy to be here. Excited to have this discussion with some of the other experts on the phone line here or on the Zoom, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Great, thanks. Divyes?
Hi, I'm Divyes Patel. I lead our innovation, research and development group here at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee, primarily in the data analytics space. So my team does a lot of proof of concepts, pilots around cloud enablement, new technologies, about how we can extend our capabilities for our customers. Been Blue Cross about 10 years now. In a pretty much similar role, kind of primarily first was on-premise building data warehouses, but then in the last 2-3 years really focused on our cloud enablement, partnering with ClearDATA about how we can build use cases in the cloud. So excited to be part of this panel and discuss opportunities and new things that this pandemic has really kind of shown us.
Excellent. Darren?
Great. Well, thank you for having me. Darren Dworkin. I have the pleasure of being the Chief Information Officer here in Los Angeles at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. It's a large academic medical center serving the greater LA community. It's an institution that has been around for almost 120 years, and really the hallmark of the institution has always been around its innovation and quality and its delivery of care. And so being in a role where I get to head up technology is always fun. Pre-COVID, there was always more than I can think of going on. As COVID hit, and we'll talk about that shortly, I think as the expression went, life went interesting. But then one of the things that I also get the luxury of doing with a fairly broad team is around that innovation focus is working on our accelerator. We have a fairly large healthcare accelerator where we look to really help enable early stage startups from all over the ecosystem find their spot deep within provider healthcare.
Excellent. So yeah, as the audience can see, we've got a group that definitely knows what they're doing. So let's start with probably the most difficult question to ponder on, but maybe an easy one to start with. And that is, when COVID hit, what were you not prepared for, or what did you think you were prepared for, but you really weren't? And of course, we saw that, and we've heard speaker upon speaker at Health Impact talk about the fact that what used to happen in a year happened in a day, or what used to happen in 5 years happened in 2 weeks. So with that in mind, just be as open as you can to say, what did you think you were prepared for that maybe didn't work out? And Darren, we'll just start with you.
Sure. Well, look, I mean, there's little doubt that as this pandemic hit, many of us, all of us, frankly, were caught off guard in sort of some way or another. And so my list could be very long. I think, the good news is I truly am amazed at how resilient our organization is and was, and how agile, really, frankly, the frontline care workers are. And I know we're about to dive into sort of the technology aspects of it, but being sort of at a large community hospital and academic medical center that really was sort of serving so much of the community, I really always knew I worked with amazing people, but I got to see it sort of firsthand in a really sort of spectacular way. That being said, I think that it really was sort of a coming in age in my mind for sort of technology. We had lots of things going. We called them pilots, we called them tests of change, we called them various experiments, and the stories are familiar. We went from 400 to 4,000, from 5 to 5,000 or 50,000 in terms of various transactions. Video visits exploded, sending folks home to work remote. But to your question in terms of sort of what didn't happen or didn't work as well as we thought, I think a lot of it was around data. We had put a lot of systems in place that, the truth be told, is while we were advancing very, very quickly all around the edges of information and real-time data availability, the truth is that our health systems are filled with lots of really smart and really experienced people. And while they had the dashboards, I'm not sure they really used them, or maybe they combined them with their gut, and maybe their gut sort of overrode sort of what they saw. When you hit a pandemic, all of the normal is gone. And so now, for the first time, experience and intuition and calm, of course, are super helpful in our leadership team, but they were searching for more information, and the dependency on real-time information really, really sort of rose. So at the beginning, it caused us to stub our toe a little bit, but sort of towards the middle of it, we got awfully agile, awfully quick, and we're able to provide information that really helped all of the organization leaders make decisions, not any different than they used to always make them, and always sort of leveraging their same skill set, but this time with a very, very different foundation set of information.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And when you look at the infrastructure for data, it might have been there, but the infrastructure for utilizing that data has been stressed, to say the least. Divyes, this is an area that you have focused on quite a bit in your career, data management and data warehousing, et cetera. So maybe two parts of the question to build on what Darren mentioned. That is, number one, is there something about your purview at Blue Cross where you see a number of different providers working with you? What were some of the things that the providers that you saw doing well or doing poorly? And then how did that translate on the payer side? Were your infrastructure, was your things ready for this kind of onslaught of remote patient monitoring, onslaught of the virtual care that Darren mentioned? There's a lot that they need that you have to provide beyond just reimbursement, which is integration technologies, et cetera. So talk about that a little bit. Where does that fit in what you're working on?
Yeah, sure. And that's a very interesting topic. I think to your original kind of point, what did work really well, I think, so we're based in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and we're about 4,500 people within our central kind of main campus. And then in March, a matter of days, 95% of us, more than probably 96, 97% of us went home, right, within a period of probably 14 days. And I think the biggest surprise, and this is from our C-suite down to just our customer service reps, that transition was beat everyone's expectations in terms of, how efficient. All our metrics in terms of customer service stayed the same. Our claims still got paid on time. So I think from that perspective, moving from a primarily on-premise kind of office setting to being completely virtual within a matter of days, and the way it kind of morphed, and is still morphing right now since we're still not allowed back in the office until next year. I think that worked really well. I think to your point about how we work in providers in the pandemic, I think one thing that probably didn't work too well, and because we've never really experienced a pandemic of this sort, because we've always done kind of pandemic kind of modeling, as a payer in terms of our actuaries, what would happen. But I think a lot of that was geared towards maybe like a flu pandemic, right? So I think the biggest thing with this coronavirus pandemic was, I think we did not anticipate the shutdown of providers during these lockdown periods, especially, in states up north, but, in our state as well, where people for eligible surgeries or elective procedures were not going in. And we saw this huge decline in provider calls, right? These providers were not shut down, but had minimum kind of things to do because, Tennessee was one of the states that COVID kind of hit later, but our kind of shutdown was in the April, May timeframe, like the rest of the country. So I think just in that perspective, and us as a payer, we have, outreach protocol, we have HEDIS quality measures that we try to track for our members. And I think the pandemic just really impacted, how we operate from a data management perspective of getting those data points in, because there were none, right? People were not going in for preventive visits. People were not going in for quality visits. So when you think about from a normal year-over-year kind of business of what we do from a quality standpoint and track, this pandemic, I think, caused a big impact to that. Now, I think what we did really pivot, and this is where the innovation part comes in, is really kind of repurposed of what are the KPIs we need to be tracking. So we went about and kind of built a series of dashboards for our internal executives. Was what is the impact of COVID really being? Who is really getting a test, and what have been those types of outcomes for those folks as we track their claims, over the last several months. But also trying to see from a perspective of, where in the state do we have vulnerable populations? So as a payer, we have a lot of history on our members, in terms of chronic conditions. So we kind of outlined counties in our states that if there wasn't an outbreak, we have a large proportion of our population that could be impacted with adverse outcomes. So we kind of work with the health department to kind of define those and kind of make sure that they were aware that, they have the right outreach protocols, that, the local mayors of those counties are taking the appropriate measures, because they have populations that could be adversely kind of impacted. But I think as we're getting into 8-9 months into this pandemic, I think we've kind of shifted more about, what are the long-term impacts of COVID, right? So not just the people that have COVID, but people that are not getting the preventive measures, right? People that are not going in for cancer screenings, not going in for their preventive kind of measurements that they're doing. How do you re-engage them back into the health system, right? Making sure, working with providers to make sure that they are going and getting back into the system. Because one thing that we're concerned about, and we don't know what the true impact is going to be, is in 2021, 2022. If you have a certain percentage of your folks that do not get these screenings, is that going to lead for identification of these, chronic conditions or cancer at a lot later stage than they would have if they would have got their screenings done this time? So we're really kind of cognizant around that and building a series of kind of dashboards as well to kind of address that. And I'll just add one thing, in the middle of the pandemic, the racial tension that happened mid-year, and then we've done a lot of research, and we're doing a lot of research with local universities here in Nashville, called one particularly, Meharry College, where we're looking at the true racial disparities, within our health system. So kind of identifying, as you've seen in the news, that COVID has impacted certain minorities more than others, but really kind of quantifying that with COVID and the data that we have in collaborations with these universities, so we can put a plan together, right? How do we address social determinants of health? So I think that, the pandemic, that is something that has been kind of existing probably in the health system, but I think the pandemic has really put a big spotlight on that and how we can address that from a data perspective. I think that has been a positive sign.
No, that's good to hear. And Chris, before I bring you in, I'm just going to ask Darren a quick question to respond to what Divyes was talking about. And was there anything in particular, Darren, that since you guys are in different parts of the country, it's okay for you to talk about your local payers, could they have done something from an infrastructure, data management, or other perspective to make the providers' job easier during this time when obviously you guys had a bigger onslaught of requirements that were different than what the payers were always accustomed to? Anything that the payers could have done better or differently to support the health systems in your area, Darren?
Look, pre-COVID and post-COVID, hopefully sort of one day, I promise you I'll have a very long laundry list of things that I think payers can do better for providers. But I really do have to say that in our community, particularly sort of in California, the payers really did sort of step up and try to figure out how best to become partners with us. A lot of that, quite candidly, took the form of waiving a lot of the regulations and rules that we sort of had in place. And you know, the irony is that when you hear that, your tendency is to be like, yay, no more rules. But you know, the truth is that a lot of those rules are there to protect everybody. And so it's not as easy as it sounds. It's not just simply saying is, you know, forget everything. It's really sort of going through them sort of one by one and sort of understanding. You know, I think there's an amazing point here raised of, you know, it's going to be a while, and my guess it'll probably come out of academic research, really of what the effect was on, you know, decades of buildup for preventative care that clearly took sort of a little bit of a rest, not because providers weren't doing anything, obviously because everybody was busy reprioritizing where the work sort of needed to happen. But, you know, I think that, you know, my general comment, and it applies really beyond payers, is that those areas where we had partnerships, when the pandemic hit, we were able to leverage those partnerships truly in amazing ways. I think that one of our biggest struggles was when we needed to solve a problem and we didn't have existing partnerships in place. In the midst of a pandemic, not the easiest time to sort of find new relationships and figure out how you're going to work together, given all the pressure on the crisis. And so we're very fortunate in that we have many partners, and I'm really sort of just so happy to share and proud to sort of share that each and every one of them stepped up, trying to answer the question of how do we help our community first.
Yeah, that's terrific. And speaking of partners, Chris, you know, from your chief privacy officer and security officer perch, you get to see many, many healthcare institutions across the spectrum. Can you talk a little bit about what did you, if you looked at the broad spectrum, what were most not prepared for when COVID hit? Any surprises, et cetera? Or were most of your customers generally prepared and were able to then leverage the cloud to increase the capacity that they needed pretty quickly? And then just add on to that, what are some suggestions that you have going forward for doubling down and using the cloud in more secure ways? There was a troubling statistic from last week, I believe it was a Gartner report, if I'm not mistaken, was that 86% of CIOs in a survey admitted that they had to relax security in order to allow remote care, remote utilization, et cetera, to take place. And this was across industries, not specifically in healthcare. So that was a little scary, but necessary. I mean, nobody's saying somehow that was that something was done wrong. So just talk, number one, what were people not prepared for that they thought they might have been? And then second, how do they maintain security and privacy, but increase the capability of doing remote care, remote patient monitoring, remote everything?
Yeah, first of all, I want to tell Darren and Divyes thank you for all of the heroic efforts you had undertaken during the peak of the pandemic. You don't get a lot of thanks for the data analysis that happens. All of us tune in to the Chrome browser. We pull up the Johns Hopkins graphs every day, and we were clinging to that. So a lot of the data that you guys were providing was absolutely critical to whether or not business is closed or open or stayed open or closed, or even if the people could go work out, for example. So thank you for that. I think what's interesting is there were a lot of companies that were migrating already to the cloud before the pandemic started. Over the past 10 years, we've seen customers kind of go to that point of the scale has tipped in favor of cloud. But I think that the pandemic surprised everyone, of course. And in fact, one of the funny stories I'll just share is we actually do a lot of resiliency planning ourselves. A lot of it's been around cloud resiliency. We decided in, I think, late October, November of last year to do a pandemic type of exercise. There was some criticism of why do we need to do this? This would never happen, to us. Why are we even thinking about this? This is a weird scenario for us. And then, of course, a person on my team who led this in March, April, was obviously the hero of the day, because at that time we had put in place certain technologies that needed to be in place for a broader remote workforce. And we had customers that were literally taking desktops home, trying to figure out how to secure them, on a home network that may not have ever been checked. It was so much chaos there. So I think there was a lot of effort in that area. I think what I've seen our customers go through, though, is a lot of, if you think about the telemedicine space, there's a company in Austin called Remedy. They increased 9,000% over the period of time of just a quarter or two. If you look at the Teladoc merger, amazing revenues happen in those remote monitoring spaces in just a few months. That kind of demand puts an immense load on infrastructure. So what we were called to do was to support the change in the priority of existing customers. Customers that were doing tests from home around cholesterol, testosterone, suddenly now shifted their model to be all about COVID testing. And of course, that kind of infrastructure had to bolster and had to scale out, and in some cases scale up in a rapid way. We saw a lot of our customers want to consume cloud services that weren't necessarily designed for HIPAA compliance. And of course, you would see the regulators say, we're going to relax some certain standards around HIPAA compliance on remote monitoring or whatever for a period of time. And all of a sudden you would see the masses say, okay, well, good, we don't have to worry about HIPAA. Well, you still had to worry about HIPAA. So our job was really about how to make sure that they're doing that, consuming those new services in a way that keeps them within the bounds of safety, but also keeps the privacy by design, the DevSecOps principles in place, and really go to what Gardner would call next-gen managed services, to where we're enabling continuous integration, continuous development, so that the developers could to Divyes' point, push new analytics types of workloads out there, enhance the ones that are already there. For what Darren was doing, I'm sure he was working on a ton of analytics as well, making sure that that data was being consumed in a way that was quickly consumed, and some of it was probably unstructured. In fact, probably a lot of it was based on notes, and so there may be services that were used to do some natural language processing around how to bubble that information up. So those were some of the things that we saw. We continue to see innovation like we've never seen before from customers like Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee and others. Genoa is doing amazing things on the behavioral pharmacy side of the world, and just so many different providers. But we still have a concern around helping to maximize the optimization of the cloud as our healthcare customers struggle to get back up into that stage where they're making money again, instead of just dealing with massive losses.
Yeah, that's so true. And that brings us to the question around what should we be working on at the moment? So in the last 10 minutes we have before we turn over our panelists to our audience to ask questions, Divyes, what are the first 2 or 3 things that you guys are focused on from an infrastructure perspective, not just for resiliency, but life has to continue in a regular way as in addition to everything going on for COVID. So what are the top 2 or 3 things that you guys are focused on right now from infrastructure? That could be everything from doubling down on cloud, focusing on identity, 5G, et cetera. What are the top 2 or 3 things that you guys are focused on?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So what Chris said, we're a ClearDATA customer and we've got use cases in the cloud, but I think what the pandemic has really showed us is, we primarily have a big on-premise data center here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. But what our executives are really thinking, okay, because that is probably a point of failure, right? Like I said, we are primarily, working from home, but we have to have a skeleton crew right now on campus to kind of maintain that data center and just keep the lights on. So what happens if there's an outbreak, within that population, what is our backup? So I think, the pandemic has kind of shown us is like, we need to have multiple contingencies in place. So I think, one thing that we're really working on, what is our broad kind of cloud strategy for the future? We still have a big footprint on premise, but where does cloud really fit in? How do we balance what we do in the cloud? And to Chris's point, the innovation and those services that are available out there, we can't compete, doing things on premise. The other thing, I think, what the pandemic has really shown, and Darren's and Chris have both said this on the provider side, it is all of the virtual care, right? The patient monitoring. And I think has set an expectations. We've seen it in our own metrics, and we use a third party to do telehealth, but those metrics, they exploded Q2, Q3. They've kind of leveled off and going down, but it's still at a much elevated level than what it was pre-pandemic. So what we're working on right now, what is our digital front door strategy? How do we bring in patient monitoring device data directly into our infrastructure so we can do the more real-time kind of monitoring, our outreach protocol, our care management staff. So I think, what the future is really, and we're trying to tee up, and this is where the innovation really is, what is going to be care management, from a payer perspective? What is disease management going to be from a payer perspective? Because the expectations of our members are different now. They've been doing this for months now, right? Not going for doctors, but taking care of themselves and buying these types of patient monitoring devices. But how do we take that, connect it back into our infrastructure and create that seamless experience, what we have right now? Because a lot of times pre-pandemic, we would call members that needed care management, disease management, and says, well, go into your doctor and get, so-and-so test done, right? In this new world, is that going to be possible? Or if they have these devices, they'd be like, well, why do I need to go in when I have these devices? Can't you just read them? So I think we're really figuring out, and this is really accelerated. It's always been on the back burner for us, I think, but the pandemic has really shown that this really needs to be kind of a priority for us, right? What is going to be our digital front door strategy? How do we connect in the cloud? How do we build, how do we allow third parties also from a security standpoint? Because I think, we know we can't do it ourselves, but we're third parties that we can give them access to data so they can build applications or build integration services for us, for our members on our behalf, and have that in a secure manner. So I think those are the things that we're really looking at right now and trying to figure out what our strategy needs to be going forward.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And Darren, as you think about what infrastructure you're focused on, what are the top 2 or 3 things that you're working on? And maybe even make it so that, make it like I wish others could help us with X, or is it more about you being able to just focus on it given all the other things that you're doing? So what are the top 2 or 3 things? And then do you need external help to do that, or are you able to handle it yourself?
We definitely need help, but I'll come back to that. I think that we're an organization of and not or. So our to-do list is many, but forced by the construct of the question to just pick a few. Let me highlight some. So the first is data, and we covered it. I think really doubling down on real-time information at the right time for the right person to perform the right task, whether it's clinically, whether it's administratively. I mean, heck, we never really thought of advanced predictive analytics for supplies, but boy, PPE has changed all of that, right? And so we're really investing quite a bit of infrastructure and really sort of working on, it's more than just sort of the dashboard, it's making sure the right information is there and that, you know, they're really sort of helping folks do what they need to do. And the real secret we've learned through COVID is, with all due respect to my colleagues, my executive colleagues, it's interesting for us to have dashboards, but boy, they're a heck of a lot more useful when they're down sort of at the front line, whether they're in the pharmacy or whether they're sort of, you know, in respiratory, in nursing, and the list goes on and on. So data and real-time information is definitely sort of number one. Number two, you know, I'll pick up the theme of digital front door. I couldn't agree more. Cedars-Sinai was fortunate in that we've been very aggressive pre the pandemic around sort of launching sort of our digital journeys with lots of peace and love to my payer friends. I'm not so sure we see your role as having a digital front door. We see your role as helping to enable us. I think that patients and their families in our community look to their providers, their physicians primarily, but certainly sort of their care teams to help take care of them. I think we've shown everybody in a very rapid and let's be honest, we've run an experiment we never wanted to run, but we proved to ourselves that we can go a lot faster and do a lot more with regards to telehealth. But also let's be cautious because maybe not everything is appropriate for a televisit. And so let's be quick not to point to folks that aren't doing it for certain things and call them Luddites and they're moving too slow. I think that we do need to, you know, have a role of really investigation and making sure that these visits have the right efficacy and we're sort of doing the right thing for patients and their families. But there's no doubt that we can do more. And with that, by the way, I'll weave in the last part of your question, which is that is the area we need the most help. I learned many, many years ago, our institution learned many, many years ago, academic medical centers are amazing at many things. Building software is not one of them. And so we need partners that we can work with. It's why we have the accelerator. It's why we invest in our venture fund. It's really about sort of seeking deep, deep partnerships, and, you know, venture and accelerators are the currency of the day. And so that's why we sort of do that. And the third one, which I want to touch on, and you know, we sort of brought up today, is, you know, at the end of the day, you know, our belief is that the health system is in the trust business, and trust really happens with security. We are custodians of our patients and their families' information while we're making use of it. Our number one job is to get it back to them so that we can enable their care. And, you know, as part of that number one job, we need to make sure we're doing it safely and securely. And, you know, I think that, again, it's easy to sort of throw rocks every once in a while and say, this group isn't doing enough, this group isn't doing enough. It is hard to have really complex, really private, really confidential information moving at the speed we all want it to move on. We can all make up our industry analogy and say, but they do it over here like that. So it's hard to do that. And keep in mind, our margin of error is zero. We really can't make any mistakes. And so how do you balance sort of doing that? Again, another place that we need partners and we need innovation and we need sort of great ideas. I'm very, very optimistic that we're going to get it done. But maybe that's a little bit of a flavor of where we're looking forward.
No, that sounds great. And just maybe given that we have a payer on the panel, what are some of the things that they could be doing to help you guys more, especially on the digital front door side? Because I as I speak to payers and providers, everybody's working on this, but I've never heard two of them getting together and saying, we're working on this together. Right? So what does that look like, Darren, from you? Divyes, I'd love for you to respond to that, and then we'll bring in Chris to close us out because we only have a few minutes left.
Well, I don't want to get ahead of any big announcement, but keep your eye on Southern California. I think we will prove to you that payers and providers are working very close together. That aside, I think we just each have information, we each have resources, and figuring out how to align them in a complementary way instead of trying to sort of compete on the same problem solving of the same function, is really sort of where we need to go. And I think, by the way, we've proven it in the past. HEDIS measures is a great example where you have amazing partnerships between payers and providers, and I think that we can continue that. So again, I wasn't trying to lead this up as a us against them.
No, of course not. No.
I think that we have a really good opportunity ahead.
Yeah, and it turns out that in the U.S., the reason why there is this level of, let's call it, whether it's differentiation, antagonism, depending on what you're looking at between payers and providers, is because our economy and our healthcare economy is set up that way. Not because there's somebody evil and somebody less evil, but that we have different roles for our different participants. With that, Divyes, is there something that Blue Cross has learned in Tennessee about how to help payers, how payers can help providers through, especially the digital front door part? Because that can't just be, I mean, remote patient monitoring, everybody needs the data simultaneously. So what does it mean that it's going to come from a payer to a provider or from a provider to a payer? Talk about that a little bit, and then we'll have Chris summarize for us what he sees other customers doing in this area.
Yeah, and I actually do agree with Darren. You know, we hear from our members all the time that they, you know, get their best medical advice from providers, right? But I think, you know, what has been a challenge, and this goes back pre-pandemic, has been data interoperability standards between providers, payers, even provider to provider. You know, we're focused a lot on FHIR right now. The FHIR resources, that data standard. We actually got a couple of pilots in the cloud about how do we build true data interoperabilities between providers and ourselves. You know, to Darren's point, you know, we've done a great job on the HEDIS perspective of getting data directly from providers into our infrastructure so we can kind of raise quality scores for our members and also for providers. But also, I think what this pandemic has really shown is how do we, you know, take that to the next level? How do we have more real-time data exchange? Is it through FHIR? You know, what are those standards that we need to all come to, you know, in agreement? You know, there's a lot of organizations like Da Vinci, there's stuff at the CMS level. We've got participants on that, and providers are participating as well. So I think, you know, we're doubling down on our efforts about how do we really, you know, get those standards kind of aligned? How do we kind of do more real-time data exchange? To Darren's point, we have a lot of history, per se, on some of our members that have been with us a long time, but how do we, you know, exchange that data more in a real-time manner, just, you know, to help, you know, both providers and payers.
That sounds great.
Yeah, to manage our consumers, but that's ultimately what we want to do, right?
Perfect. So, Chris, in the last minute, we have to take us home here. We're going to turn it over to the audience to ask questions live now. Before that, tell us, when you look at the customers that you're working with, which ones are doing some of the most innovative things from a managed services provider utilization perspective? The big three cloud is set now, right? We're not gonna see a fourth and fifth and 10th big, huge competitor that's going to come in. But there is a big play in this area, especially of managed services, is what is a good way for a hospital or a payer to select a managed service provider that sits on top of the clouds to do the kinds of things that Darren was saying he could potentially use help with?
Yeah, I think Darren said it well when he said, you know, this is a trust environment. And so we're seeing a lot of payers push the envelope on innovation. It's good that, you know, these payers have the funds to do that. It's a little easier sometimes when they do have those funds to be able to.
Oh, and especially now with record profits coming in because of the lack of utilization. So, yeah.
Well, it makes a difference when they can attract, you know, 50 new DevSecOps cloud engineers from somewhere. It's important, Darren, to your point, to have that innovation core that you're working with within the provider space, because that's exactly where you're going to see a lot of the innovation come from. You'll be able to capitalize on that. And frankly, from a recruiting perspective, you're going to, you know, that's more attractive than come and work at a hospital and help us move stuff out of a data center. It's just a lot more attractive to the engineers out there. So,
no, it's pretty attractive to come work at a hospital. Come on.
Well, I'm talking about, you're right, but from a engineer perspective, you're going to see competition from the other cloud providers. You know, we face that a lot. You know, the partners that we have on the cloud will also try to take our people, and that's because they're smart. Same with over at Blue Cross, they'll try to do that too.
Well, they may have ping pong tables, but we have a pretty phenomenal mission.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that helps us attract the talent as well. So I think just keeping the eye on the ball from a privacy and security perspective, as well as trying to innovate, using the partners to help in the areas of their expertise. Don't try to do it all yourselves. I would encourage use the partners that you need, and don't believe you have to build everything in-house to be successful. Sometimes it's actually the opposite.
Yeah.
And with that, I do look forward to the questions.
No, that's terrific. And just as we transition it over to the audience, I mean, remember that cloud is pure infrastructure, and then you can have managed services, and then on top of that, you actually have the application and other vendors like SaaS providers and things like that. I think looking at all three layers and being smart about that, especially now when it's difficult to hire and keep and retain the proper talent, it's getting very, very tough out there. So with that, we'd love to open it up for questions. Ask away, and our panelists will stick around for a little while. Thanks, everyone. Welcome, everyone. Darren, Chris, and I think Divyes is joining us shortly. Darren, maybe one place for us to pick up, and there has been a lively discussion on the chat, so we can bring in those conversations as well. But I wanted to pick up on this last piece, which we had just finished up with, around managed services. So what do you think about the term managed services in terms of what it means for you as a technology executive? Is it super helpful to you, marginally helpful to you? Where does managed services sit in your priorities?
Sure, you know, it's an interesting world that we're finding ourselves into, and Chris touched on it, is that there's sort of a new definition or a new view of sort of what managed services even looks like. And part of that is because you have large tech giants like the Amazons and the Googles and the Microsofts sort of bringing their cross-vertical, cross-industry platforms to play. And while that is amazing that for the first time, we in healthcare are moving past maybe the little niche things we had to be able to play with the real adult toys, the downside of that is that often the gap for us to learn to play with the adult toys might be a little bit much. And I think that in our view, this sort of new world of managed services and frankly, you know, the types of work that, you know, companies like ClearDATA do really sort of help take a sort of a cross-vertical product and hyper-specialize it back into healthcare where it really needs to take into account a whole bunch of esoteric things that, you know, somebody in the airline industry probably doesn't care that much about.
And that's a great point. So Chris, expand on that a little bit. Why did ClearDATA start a number of years ago focused on healthcare? What's so special about it versus any other industry? It could be financial, it could be avionics, it could be any other hospitality industry. What's so different?
Well, when I was, just before starting this company, almost 10 years ago, I was walking the halls of the hospitals. I was doing a lot of work for Dignity Health at the time and some other covered entities. And I saw the challenges that were in the marketplace for where would you store this data, Chris? And, you know, the HIPAA lawyers would come out in mass and they would say, hey, you know, we got to do this privacy assessment. We got to make sure that we're vetting you as a vendor. And over time, I had to get pretty good at understanding HIPAA and discovered that there was really no place to put this data in a way that was, to Darren's point, he always says it very well, in a hyper-focused, laser-focused place to do nothing but protect that patient data. It's a nuanced kind of an approach. You can't just say, hey, I'll just go apply something here. Here's your downtime SLA. Yeah, that'll be 4 hours. You don't have a margin of error, as Darren said earlier in the presentation. And so ClearDATA was started with that vision, which was to take the burden off of the healthcare providers and the payers and others and focus on automating the patching, automating the CIS hardening of the machine images, automating the security, automating the vulnerability management, all that non-sexy stuff that Darren's team, the Divyes team would have to do instead of innovate, instead of go develop some application that will allow them to better serve their patients. And so as part of a managed service, that's the value that many of our customers find as they're going through their cloud journey. I'll also add that in the cloud journey, people are at different places in that journey. Some know how to do the CI/CD pipeline integration. Some have a really great handle on DevSecOps and infrastructure code and containers and all the serverless technologies. Others don't. And so we have to be adaptive to help each person or each entity's journey in that cloud meet them where they are.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense in one very specific way, and that is that when you talk to an MSP and you have to tell them what HIPAA is, or what is high trust, or these what is an FDA medical device and why does that matter, right? There are lots of these things here, and so when you're making a selection, those are like the early questions to ask. If you have to explain that level, you're probably ready for a specialized MSP like a ClearDATA. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Divyes, are you on? We see you trying to get on, but just wanted to see if you were already on. And we wanted the audience to know that we've shifted the time for the next session to start at 4:15, because we have a lot to talk about here over the next few minutes as well. And one really important question that came up in the chat, Darren, I'd love for you to comment on is, you guys, with the number of priorities that you have, what kind of vendors, when they send you emails, when the contacts come in, what goes to the top of your list versus those you're willing to ignore right now? This could have been different a year ago, but what are the vendors that are reaching out to you that you say, you know what, I really got to talk to these guys because I'm working on X? And I'd love for Divyes and Darren to answer that. Divyes, are you on? We don't hear you yet, but Darren, go ahead and answer while we see if we can get Divyes on.
Yeah, look, I don't know that I have any magical answer, and I always feel bad in these forums because if I've accidentally wronged somebody or missed an email or have not gotten back to you, please don't take it personally. I respect that everybody has good intent and everybody has a job, but it frankly is hard to respond to each and every one. And again, just to be very candid, unless you're answering yes, it's not a short conversation, and so it takes a little bit of investment. But at a high level, what I'll offer up is that I think that one of the things, and I touched on it during the session, that I'm most proud of is that I think one of the things we saw through COVID was that IT has come of age, and that our investment over the last 10 years in platforms really has begun to pay off, and that we've been able to use them in unique ways that we obviously never planned for. And I think that when you're starting the journey of digitization for a health system, when I look back 10, 15 years and I think about how paper-based we didn't have a lot of optionality. And so we were spending a lot of time putting in platforms, putting in the basics. Now that we have those done, and by no means am I trying to say that we're done, but now that we have sort of the core pieces of the puzzle in place, I think rather than IT picking and pushing down, we really have moved to where we're really looking to understand what's being pulled. I spend a lot of my time, almost all of my time, in new ways these days, but meeting with my colleagues to really understand where their workflow strains are, where the gaps are in the digitization of their workflows and their work. And to be really knowledgeable of that so that I and my team can play the role of translator, so that when we hear about a solution, we're not wondering whether somebody would be interested to take this piece of clay and mold it into the enterprise in this way, but more, I'm playing the rudimentary match game of, I've been looking for somebody that can do that. And the truth be told is that when we focus on our accelerator and we bring in companies, we're often bringing in companies that we couldn't find people that were offering us solutions in that space. And so it's a lot of translation, it's a lot of matchmaking. And boy, I hope we get it right most of the time, but I certainly acknowledge that we don't every time.
No, that's a great answer. And Chris, so we'll let you take us home here as you did in the main part of the panel. Let's look at this question, and Darren, you're welcome to comment on it too. With M&A activity increasing, how does that affect your vendor relationships? For example, you may have a close relationship with a vendor, and then an M&A event occurs, which changes what you initially bought and enjoyed. And Chris, I wanted you to check that first. I was curious. Does a hospital health system being in the cloud help them with further M&A, or does it hinder them? What do you think your customers see? Improvement in M&A capabilities, or more detrimental?
I certainly believe that the cloud improves the M&A activity. I think if you think about just from a pure integration perspective, it's a lot easier to agree upon a platform that might not be based in some older technology in VMware, for example. And so obviously that integration has to happen. I think the cloud, I think healthcare in general right now, in healthcare technology, M&A activity is white hot. Something like 11 IPOs this last month or so, or even more. And some of the valuations are crazy. In terms of paying how many years forward in revenue for a company. So that the activity's there, it's great. It's driving, that price up, and Darren and your venture fund, you're probably having to deal with that in a way that you probably didn't predict either. But I think M&A activity is helping to drive certain synergies. When we invest, for example, in a partner, and suddenly that partner acquires a quasi-competitor of ours, we have to reevaluate sometimes, how does that impact what we're doing, and should we continue to use that? So we have to keep our eyes on it for sure.
Okay, great. And we're getting the hook here because apparently I'm letting you guys go way too long because I'm enjoying this conversation. But we've got to run to our 4:15 session. So here, thank you for joining us. Darren, Chris, Divyes, I know you tried to get on, but weren't able to join us here. But we appreciate you trying. And we'll see you on the next session. Thanks again, guys.